And now we turn to the one, the only, Lauren Southern, an independent journalist and the author of Barbarians, How the Baby Boomers, Immigration and Islam Screwed My Generation, a highly recommended read. You can follow her on twitter.com/Lauren_Southern and facebook.com/Lauren.Southern.589. Lauren, thanks so much for taking the time. I know you've been traveling, I think, this Christmas season more than Santa himself. So thanks for taking the time in your busy schedule to drop by for a Christmas chat.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Christmas growing up, I got to imagine that Christmas in the Southern household was a fairly delightful affair.
Absolutely. I mean, I think back to opening up a VHS tape of Lord of the Rings. I got Return of the King, and it was on multiple tapes. That was one of the best Christmases ever. They got me a bunch of Lord of the Rings action figures, and we watched It's a Wonderful Life, and that's kind of a theme we have every year. And it makes me think back, every Christmas I think back to this one quote from Lord of the Rings: the world may be full of darkness and peril, but still there is much beauty to be found. And I always just kind of get back from the battle zone of filming all these protests and everything and sit and remember what we're fighting for when I'm with my family every Christmas.
The honorary Eowyn of the non-leftists. I think that's how we have to go with it. Now, is it food? Is it drink? What does the Southern family orbit around when it comes to Christmas? Storytelling, communication, I imagine, good conversation. What's at the center of it?
Oh man, definitely food. We have every year we do a traditional Danish dish, lefse and setsufa. I think we even talked about this last year. I'm always excited for that. And then lots and lots of storytelling, debates, just kind of catching up. It sucks because I'm traveling a lot more. My sister's out of the house. Everyone's moved out. So it's lots of catching up right now. But it's really nice to come back to my family because I kind of see them as something that has overcome modernism, as kind of the end stage of when you overcome all this. Like, my parents are happily married. They never divorced, nothing like that. And both of them had terrible adverse childhood experiences. I have more sets of grandparents than I can even name. Like, I don't even know some of them because they're in jail. I'm not kidding. Yet both my parents kind of overcame that and created such a beautiful family and community and all of that. And it gives me hope after everything else that I see and all of the kind of family unit being destroyed, relationships being destroyed, that can be fixed when I watch my parents and what they build every Christmas. I
didn't know that. I'm trying to do sort of the decade math in my brain, which is not a particularly math-enabled brain. Well, certainly for my family, the parents were messed up by the war in particular. And with your grandparents, was it the war, Second World War? Was it some other cultural revolution, do you think, that caused, or was it just really inherited, like medieval, post-medieval dysfunction?
Well, my grandma, for example, she was abused as a child in the UK. She went through all the orphanages there where there was obviously sexual assault, beatings, everything. And at 17, she ran away on a boat to Canada and then, I guess, kind of carried some of that damage. And throughout that, I literally on my mother's side, there are so many parents on that side that I can't even track them. I've never even met my grandpa on that side, my biological one. And yet same with my father, I have so many sets of grandparents on that side as well, just because a lot of them, the war displaced my family in Denmark and they came to Canada as well, which caused for a rough childhood for my grandparents on that side as well. And both my parents somehow overcame all that. And we're talking like abuse, all this kind of stuff, never being settled down in one place. And they both overcame that and have been happily married, had kids, settled down, figured it out. And it shocks me to this day. I don't even understand how they managed to do it.
Have you talked about it much with them to sort of figure out the path that they took to heal that kind of cycle of dysfunction?
Well, they'll attribute it to religion. They'll attribute it to the church and just kind of healing through the church and going to lots of community groups constantly and always working through the problems. Both of them are quite big fans of your show, actually. My dad donates to you and not to me.
Well, he did give you the gift of life, which could be considered a fairly substantial donation, so...
They're both quite big fans of the show, actually. And whenever I ask them, I'm like, how the heck did you overcome all this? Like my mom was moved out of the house at like 17 as well. She couldn't stay there. And yeah, they would 100% attribute it to religion. Now, people who are not religious, I mean, could attribute that to things like having a community, having a strong sense of morals and ethics and values, which obviously stem from Christianity, which is what a lot of people would attribute to the success of the West in Europe. They'd say it's just the values that stem from that. And that could very well be it. But they will always go back to spirituality when you ask them.
Well, it's funny because religion, I shouldn't say all religion, the Christianity that I grew up in, the Christianity that I know, does have some seriously long-lasting communities. You know, for those of us in the alternative media, I don't know if we want to dip into this particular well of fire, but, you know, there is a lot of fractious back and forth and infighting and tension and stress and eruptions and so on going on. It's like watching like an entire Best Buy wall of television series of soap opera dramas going on with the occasional clatter of small arms intellectual firepower. But the Christian communities that I know of are remarkably long-lasting. People stay in them their whole life. They obviously have their differences, but they find ways to work them out or smooth them over or maybe just ignore them. I'm not sure exactly. But compared to Christian communities, other communities seem to have, I guess, a little bit more of a challenge remaining stable and long-lasting.
Yeah, I mean, the guy who, when my mother was a teenager, kind of converted her to Christianity or brought her to church, his name is Sam, and he lives like way up north in Canada. He still comes and visits, and he visited all the time when I was growing up, just to come and say hi, and they're living two very different lives, but they still feel that sense of kind of, I don't know if it's as much as duty as it's, like they see it as a just important thing to do to develop these relationships and have that long-lasting community. They seem to, it's funny that a lot of the statistics that prove to create a good community, a happy life, and a successful society are so in line with the values of Christian religion and how they go through things. I mean, just all the studies about having that community, having those people you meet with. Like my dad has a group of guys he meets with for Bible study every week, and they talk about overcoming a lot of their challenges, and they have crazy problems. Of course, everyone has insane problems, whether it be divorces, getting in fights, money, and they all work them out together. And I don't know how often you see that in atheists, or not even just atheists, like other communities.
Let's just say non-Christian communities. It sort of reminds me, if you've ever seen, what is the movie, The Life of Brian, where they talk about all of the splinter groups that have happened in the various rebellious gatherings and so on. It is, you know, in Christianity, there does seem to be something that allows people to not betray each other, to not turn on each other, to not be, you know, best friends and then greatest enemies, depending on which way the wind is blowing. I don't know, maybe it's Judas and the 30 pieces of silver, or maybe there's a unity with so much of the higher values that divisions can be healed through appeal to, you know, humility and so on. But it is something that if you've not experienced it, it's hard to imagine. And if you place your social matrix into non-Christian communities, a lot of times it seems that it's a countdown to disappointment. Right. And I have trouble with it because I'm someone that grew up asking so many questions. And unfortunately, I didn't always have the pastors or the youth group leaders that could answer them. So I kind of rejected Christianity for a long time because I didn't have the answers. I didn't get the answers I wanted to my questions. And I'm still constantly reading and asking those questions and trying to figure it out logically. But what I see before my eyes, like the healing in these communities, how happy these people are when I attend church with my family, and just seeing, like I said, my two parents who had these terrible childhood experiences successfully living a traditional lifestyle, it's logic kind of defying what should happen because of that religious aspect. So it's too big for me. I can't understand it. I'm trying to figure it out. I really am. One of the things I think that could happen, let's spitball, shall we? So one of the things I think that could happen, Lauren, is when you grow up with a harsh childhood, you have an antagonistic relationship to the world and your culture and your society, because there is that sense of like, well, everyone stood by and let it happen and so on. But I do think that in Christianity, the focus on humility and generosity, and in a sense, grit your teeth and be kind, even if you've not received kindness. And sometimes, of course, it's a greater virtue if you've not received kindness to be kind in turn, gives you the peace that comes from generosity. And the people I've seen who were harmed in childhood who weren't religious don't seem to lose that fractious and hostile relationship with the world that they feel either enabled it or abandoned them to their abusers. But the people who are Christians, because they focus on humility and kindness and charity, they create in the world what was not provided to them as children. And that seems to be part of the healing process.
That's really interesting. I was just having this conversation with my mother. I actually kind of had a bit of a breakdown because I've been traveling so much, meeting so many people, meeting a lot of my heroes, meeting a lot of people that I felt were building up kind of this movement I cared about. And I've had so many of my, they say never meet your heroes. I've had so many of these men that I put on pedestals, those visions of them crushed, and kind of a lot of my childhood dreams and visions and how I saw goodness as this kind of battle against Mordor being just all of the heroes of the fellowship. That whole dichotomy of good versus evil kind of crashed down for me in the last couple of years of traveling and meeting people and just constantly hitting and seeing imperfection. And like my mother just sat me down and she's like, you'll never find a perfect man. Man will always disappoint. Man will always fall short. Man is always full of sin. And if you look to man as your guide of goodness and something that you see as the ultimate being, you will always be disappointed. So she's always trying to have these religious higher conversations with me. And yeah, it's tough. It's rough.
No, it's true. And this idealization followed by disappointment, sometimes I think you have the self-knowledge to avoid that, followed by hostility. I mean, I remember, I think I was even younger than you when I was reading Nathaniel Branden's expose on Ayn Rand and objectivism. I think it was called Judgment Day. And just seeing how petty and vicious Ayn Rand could be, when you see this rational goddess on this high pedestal and so on, it is quite devastating because when you have someone you can emulate, it gives you a path. If you find that the person that you can't really emulate because you don't want to end up like them, you kind of turn from a path that's somewhat carved to like the stony, scorpion-infested, like creeping vines and choking quicksand and all you got to go your own route. And it's a lot easier to go through a path that's already carved than to carve out your own route. Although it's, it's satisfying in the long run. And you look back and you say it was the best, but, that doesn't do much in the moment. So I know what you mean. I think if we do have that standard that there are ideal people out there, that disappointment is part of what undermines sometimes our own commitment to virtue. And if you have, of course, the Christian sense that man is fallen, then you have an ideal of Jesus, of God, that can't be disappointed and thus stays as a North Star you can navigate by.
Precisely. You have to have something, an ideal that is truly higher than any man on earth, because man will always disappoint and fall short. And yeah, that's tough for me because I still struggle with religion. I certainly do. I struggle with spirituality and I have a lot of unanswered questions still, but I also see so much failure in the man-made solutions. It's the great Nietzschean problem of what do we replace God with now that man has killed him? And
philosophy. Still working on it. Still working on it, though. We're working on that. And this, I was talking about this with another guest. I wanted to get your thoughts on it because the one thing that's wonderful about Christianity is that humility. The humility combined with an exquisite sense of the corruptibility of man is one of the reasons why Christianity stands between the socialists and their big, giant, murderous government that they want so desperately. And so, first of all, Christians want to give people free will, therefore they don't want to compel people, which means small government. For Christians, it's not a virtue if you're forced to do it. So if you want to help the poor, guess what? You have to get off your ass and go and help the poor. You have to give them money, you have to give them time. It has to be chosen in order for it to be virtuous, and therefore the welfare state is immoral because it compels. And the idea that there's a deep humility in intellectualism, that I don't know the best way to help the poor. I don't think anybody knows the best way to help the poor. Anybody, any more than anyone knows what is the best cell phone or the best computer or whatever. This needs to be into the free market of ideas, and this is why charities should compete at the best way to help the poor. And so this aspect of Christianity, let people have free will, don't compel them, and that the state is a necessary evil, and also that the state will be filled with corruptible human beings. And it's weird because socialism or the left has both a very negative and a ridiculously positive view of human nature. It's rape culture, it's patriarchy, it's corruption, it's nasty. So let's give all the power in the known universe to a small cadre of people who are going to be just plain wonderful. And it's like, you got to pick one. You can't have both, right? There's no way you get that buffet on the same table. And so from that standpoint, it's hard to argue that Christianity's focus on free will and its suspicion of aggregations of power, particularly political power, it is one of the big bastions that stands between the socialists and the prize that they want, which is the undoing of the rest of us.
It's interesting because I see a lot of the young new right taking on kind of a different form of Christianity, and it's not the same Christianity that I grew up with, because I think what they're finding is they're almost frustrated with that free will side of Christians, because what Christians have done is I love them to death, and this is something that makes them amazing, and I also would align a lot with it, but you meet these pacifist Christians, and that was something that frustrated me so much with my dad. He is such a wise, good man, but he would let people walk over him sometimes, I felt like, because he would always take the high road. He'd always turn the other cheek. He'd always be like, Lauren, it's not worth it. I'm not going to let this person get to me. And I'm like, punch him in the face. He's being such a dick. Like, why don't you just punch him in the face, And you get
so wait. He has his Christianity as the angel on one shoulder, and then there's you, the blonde little devil, on the other shoulder saying, come to the dark side, Father, come to the dark side.
Precisely. But you get this very pacifist group of Christians that are, they know what is happening in the world. They're very aware of it, but they're just, they don't want to rule with an iron fist at all, because there's so much freedom. It's almost like the libertarian crisis. If you allow open borders, if you allow all of this degeneracy and everything to take over because you don't want to step on anyone, you want to be kind and always offer kindness, I worry that evil will take over in some cases if we don't push back. So a lot of younger Christians, which I think are lacking, they're very clever, a lot of the young right, but they're not very wise, I think. A lot of us are lacking in wisdom right now. We don't quite have that kind side of turn the other cheek. We're all kind of crusade now, the violent First Testament wrath of God against the Muslims kind of thing. And there has to be a balance between it, I think. But I still need to figure out the whole religion part. I don't know. Just thoughts.
Well, no, Christmas is a great time for asking this. Now, your public life, should it ever branch out into anything controversial, do you think that those controversies might have any effect on the peace, quiet, love, and serenity of your family gatherings?
Oh, boy.
Let's just go purely theoretical here, just in case you ever did or said anything that might be controversial.
Yeah, what's the saying? Never talk about sex, politics, or religion. That is certainly a motto that we've had to take on the last 2 years, depending on which side of the family we meet with. My mother's side is fairly liberal. My father's side is a little more conservative. So when we're meeting with my mother's side, my dad and I are given gag orders the entire time.
Really?
Pretty much. Otherwise,
it's like the handy maternal plunger right there, just in case the syllables start to spill out. There you go.
Precisely.
Sorry. One other alternative is to have the, elephant-sized tranquilizer gun underneath the table, Han Solo style, so that...
If anyone gets a chance, there's a video. It's on College Humor, like diffusing Thanksgiving conversations, and it's about a guy in a bomb suit. He's with his family. He's invited a friend, and every time a topic comes up, like the NFL will be on, and someone will mention Colin Kaepernick, and he just has to defuse the bomb and try to divert it to another topic, and then Trump comes up and the bomb is strapped and wired on the whole table. He doesn't know what to do. Yeah, I think a lot of people have that family experience.
And what's your approach to it? I mean, is it, peace for the sake of community? Is it a lot of tongue biting, or do you basically just drink? Because that's some people's solution.
I think it's more, I talk about politics all the time. I have so many people I can discuss politics with. I have a whole audience that listens to me talk about politics. So if I can do anything, if it's just shut up and bite my tongue and enjoy some time with family, I think Christmas is the time to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay to take a break. That's important. You know, I have this weird healing hands with computer stuff. So every time I go to someone's house, they're like, you know, this thing happens when I print. That's kind of weird. Do you mind having a quick look? And it's like, most times I don't mind, at least when I was younger. But around Christmas, it's like, dude, yeah. I'm off the clock. And from that standpoint, there's a lot to connect with people outside of political differences.
I certainly would say, though, I don't think all year you should be quiet, because I mean, depending on what you consider political opinions, like opinions on relationships and family and how one votes, I do think you should talk to your family about that, because if you have this extreme politeness all the time, you're going to watch members of your family suffer. I mean, you look at liberals and they always have this sense of freedom for everyone, like, oh, women should be free to be hookers and whores and all this, but they never want their mother, their daughter, or anyone in their family to go down that path, right? All of the advice that they tell the rest of the world, they can do all this degeneracy, but they never want the people close to them to go down that road, because they know it doesn't lead to happiness. They know it's not something that's good for them. And I don't think we should have that liberal mindset with people we care about. I think we should talk to them and have tough conversations with them. I just had a very difficult conversation with my mom the other day, but she helped me work through some serious life problems of my own. And if she had not had the guts to kind of bring it up with me, then I would be worse off, even though she had that tough conversation with me, right? So I think caring is being a little tough with people sometimes.
Well, I think that's very true. Like, I do this call-in show, and people call in and they've just made the most astounding series of obviously terrible decisions. And, you know, one of my questions is always, well, where was everyone who claims to love you in your life? Why weren't they telling you? Well, this is obviously not going to work out well. Like my own life, I was in my 20s, late 20s, early 30s. I came within like a couple of months of marrying entirely the wrong woman. And it was a friend of mine. And she said something. Wasn't even that big a thing. It wasn't like she was just staging an intervention and, you know, like throwing herself bodily in front of my path to the altar. But she said, in my experience, people who are engaged to be married are generally happier than you seem to be. I remember that phrase and it was one of these, it doesn't take a lot. You don't have to have a bit, I mean, if the person's sensitive and open. And I remember thinking about that. And I remember thinking like, and you get to step off the conveyor belt of inevitability and past decisions and, you know, fallacy of sunk costs and all of that. And say, well, am I happy doing this? And you get in touch with your instincts, and we had conversations about it, and ended up breaking off the engagement. It was a big mess, but one of the best decisions I ever made as an adult. So you really don't want to let people just drift. I mean, it doesn't have to be about immigration policy, although I'm not opposed to that, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be the kind of personal life stuff. Because if we want people to be strong in the pursuit of virtue, if they're dragged down by bad relationships, by debt, by unwise investments, by lending too much money to the wrong people or whatever it is, they're not really that available to help in the fight for truth, justice, and the Western way. So help keep their decks clear of rubble, and they're going to be much more available. And that does mean, bringing up stuff they may not be that comfortable with. It may even mean a week or two of them being really upset with you, but it's really worth it, because boy, look back in your own life, the decisions that you've made that were wrong. I mean, how much would you give for someone to say, don't do it?
Absolutely. And, you know, it's funny, my mother and I were listening to your episode the other day, talking to that woman with the 2 children about how she got pregnant at 18. And I can't remember what the episode was called, but we were the entire time, we were like, why would you do that? why would you make that decision? It's so obvious he was terrible. But obviously you're in your own bubble sometimes, and you can't see that. You can't see the mistakes you're making in your own life. And having family there, this was a video I just made recently, having family there to pull you out of that situation, whether it be a bad engagement where you're scared, you've invested so much money, you've moved in, you've done all this, and you have nowhere to go. You're stuck in that if you don't have your family to go to in a lot of cases, your family to pull you out both emotionally and like a place to stay, whatever it may be. It's so important. And I was just talking about this. That's why I think the government wants to get rid of the family, because if you don't have your family, then you are alone in this world. Who are you going to depend on, or your community? And you have to go on welfare. You have to go to state-sponsored counselors. You have to go, all your most desperate needs go to the state, and therefore you're always going to want it to grow. So even
family,
people,
the original safety net, right? I mean, they're the ones. I remember when I was in theater school, there was a director there. He was a good director, very courageous. He was a young guy. He was in school. I was in there for acting and playwriting. He was there for directing. And I remember him saying, he said, when I decided to go into the arts, my parents were like, okay, it's risky. It's really, really risky, but go for it with the full and certain knowledge that no matter what happens, you will always have a place to land called us. We will always help you out if necessary. And it did give him, sometimes it can be a little bit too much, like, sure, I'll pay all your bills. You don't have to do it. But in terms of having that original safety net, the stronger families are, the stronger communities are, then the less we are afraid of failure, and the less we feel, well, we got to have that government-run safety net. And I think that's another reason why, if you don't have the soft cushion of original biology, then you are going to feel like you need the government to keep you from death's door. And I think that's another reason why they're not keen on families.
Absolutely. And, it's weird that people think, I'll make a family out of all my girlfriends. I'll be a 35-year-old single woman, and we can go drink and party, and they'll be my family. But there really is an aspect to biology and blood, I think. Like, my sister and I, we have had fights where we dragged each other off counters, pulling each other by the hair when we were growing up. We have had serious fights, but she's my family to this day. I love her. She is a wonderful human being, and that blood bond is something that is so unbreakable. And that's something I can't wait to do myself. I can't wait to have a family, because I've watched how beautiful it can be through what my parents have created, all the ups and the downs included.
And you see this all the time in movies, right? Or TV shows, where some woman, she's a single mom, right? And she's like, I'm scared. And all of her friends are like, don't worry, we're going to be there with you every step of the way. And, and it's like, no, you're not. I'm sorry, you're just not, because you're not going to come over for the third time in the middle of the night when the baby's got colic. You're just not. And there is this fantasy that somehow you can replace, friends who move, or friends who get busy, or friends who fall into the well of some dysfunctional relationship, or friends who are tired, or friends who are hungover. It's like, no, if you're a family, you kind of got to be there for each other. But your friends have a lot of choices and options. They get have their own busy lives, and they're just not a substitute. Friends are great, but they're tier 2. Tier 1 is your family.
It's crazy. Every time I'm flying, I watch the movies that are on the suggested popular list, and I watch a lot of the chick flicks, How to Be Single, Girls Night Out. Girls Night Out was the last one I watched, and it was about a woman who got divorced with a guy and all her girlfriends. She did a huge speech at the end, because I realized what's really important in my life is my girls. And they're like, yeah, they're all 40 single mothers, And it's like, some of them are going to get married, and they're going to realize that relationship is important. And there you go, one friend gone. Another one is going to move for a job. Another one is also going to get married. And you're going to have been convinced to be alone by yourself. And you're totally right. They're not going to be there at 4 a.m. to feed the baby. They're not going to be there to by your deathbed, probably. The friendships drift apart. Family doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, or some friend's going to become a Donald Trump supporter, and then
yeah,
it's all over.
It's not, there's no real commitment. Certainly not the marriage. Certainly not financial. Certainly none of these things. Certainly not blood. And I mean, friendships are great. They're wonderful. They're beautiful. But it's just not the same as family. I've seen far more. As much as people rag on marriage these days, I've seen far more friendships fall apart than marriages, despite the high rates.
So what, I guess, two other questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
The first is Christmas message for, hundreds of thousands or millions of people can end up watching or listening to this. No pressure. But Christmas message, what would you like people to think about and to focus on both over the Christmas season and going into next year?
I think myself included, a lot of us focus on a lot of negativity all through the year. We've seen our statues being torn down, churches destroyed, mass immigration destroying communities, death, terrorism. It's been horrific. And watching the news, it can really get you down, and it can really put you into this mood of anger and hatred and just wanting revenge. And I completely understand that. It is a natural reaction to seeing all of this. But I would advise people to remember what we're fighting for, what we're trying to preserve, and that it is goodness, it is this kindness. And if we let ourselves become savages to defeat savages, are we really protecting anything at all? Are we really defending anything at all? And that while all of this is going on, we should still be creating and contributing and building Western civilization as it is, and its ideas and its beauty, and remembering why we fight and preserving that while we do.
And compared to the Second World War or the First World War or just about any other war, it is really the most fun battle in history.
Yes.
And that is something to look forward to. And what are your biggest excitements or hopes for 2018?
I'm just always excited to see where the younger generation is headed, the ones in high school that are being raised on YouTube, the people that are watching the failures of cultural Marxism and seeing that cultural transformation happen. And although there's a lot of pessimism, I think we are making huge cultural advances. Just watching Piers Morgan laugh about genderless, non-binary snowmen on mainstream television while triggering the other guests. Like, he was a huge liberal, right? Watching those changes happen and repeatedly seeing the culture shift in the Overton window moving. It's going to be an amazing 2018, I think.
We've never had a better chance to save the world. We've never had this kind of communications technology. This is big stakes, win, lose, but we've never had this kind of opportunity. And while it does give us some challenges, man, we've got jetpacks to skywrite truth. And so thanks a lot, Lauren. I wish you and your family a very, very Merry Christmas. Thank you for your friendship over the last couple of years. And I really look forward to seeing what you're doing in 2018.
Thanks so much. Merry Christmas.